This is E&P Reports from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcasts, digital, and all multimedia news publishing. And hello once again, Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P Magazine. Quick housekeeping, as usual. If you're listening to us on various podcast platforms, the two most popular for this show, if you're interested, are Apple and Spotify. By all means, follow us. Watching us on YouTube, here's another piece of information, Danielle. Only 30% of our audience watches. It's all listens. So it doesn't matter what we look like. I don't even know why we do the video. By all means, there's a button below me that says subscribe. If you hit the bell to the right, you'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. Danielle, I just teased the audience with who our guest is this week. Danielle Coffey, Executive VP, General Counsel for the News Media Alliance. That's 2,000 news media outlets worldwide, correct, Danielle?
Yes, and magazine.
And magazines now. That's why it's News/Media Alliance. We reported on that last year. Before joining NMA, you were VP and General Counsel for the Telecommunications Industry Association, TIA, which was an amazing place to be before working for the news publishers and magazine publishers of the country. And are you still on the board of directors of the National Press Club Journalism? Are you still working with them?
Yeah, I have the honor of working with them. They're a great group. We just had our gala in December, our dinner. Yes, I am still part of that board. So, and I enjoy that very much.
So there is journalism in your veins in a way, correct? You're not only representing this industry because of your knowledge of legislation in the Hill and how you can work, the inner circles. You have a passion for this industry because being part of the NPCJI is quite a deal. Congratulations.
Well, I think absolutely. I think what it is that the information and the quality information that's put out to our communities and to our local neighborhoods. I mean, I get a paper to my house. I've got kids. I care about what our world becomes, for their futures. As far as everything that we're seeing on the internet right now and the search and social media platforms and the quality of that information and the financially driven amplification and massive spread of what's becoming a part of everybody's everyday lives, instead of the quality information about what's happening in businesses, in schools, in communities across our country, is, I think, very important to our future and to society and to democracy. And we see what's happening in Congress right now. We want a functional democracy. That's a good thing.
And our founding fathers, I always say imperfect men wrote a perfect document, and in there was a free, unfettered press. I mean, that final check on power, which kind of makes our our republic so special. But we're going to focus on one major topic today: compensation. Mm-hmm. This is a fact. Before we, take our break for the commercial, let's just establish the lay of the land. 60% of U.S. digital ad revenue is now captured by Google and Facebook, correct? I mean, I thought it was closer to 70, but somewhere between 60 and 70, right? They're taking the local right off the table. 90% of digital ad revenue growth was captured by Google and Facebook. And between 16 and 40% of Google search results are news content. I mean, so in all, okay, treat me like I'm a 6-year-old here. But if a guy who writes a song gets compensated every time the song is used, even a snippet of it in a commercial. I keep thinking there's a commercial on TV now that goes, whoa, ho, ho, it's Xantic. You're too young to know that song, but that song was called It's Magic. It was by a one-hit wonder back in the 70s when I was a disc jockey. But that composer is being compensated today, correct? That's just, so if in a perfect world, should not the content of a journalist would get compensation? Is that not what this all boils down to?
Yeah, that's a good framing for this entire issue. So that's exactly right. So the first, when quality journalism, and it takes a lot to invest in quality journalism. I mean, we just said the importance to society, but in order to create it in the future, you have to, especially long-term investigative journalism, you have to invest a lot. Also fact-checking, editors, you have to make sure that it's quality. That's what quality is. It costs money to be quality. That's why cheap is cheap. And so when we create that quality information and produce quality content for our readers, and it's used by Google and Facebook within their walled gardens in anti-competitive ways, and that's been evidenced through court documents, House Majority Report, DOJ investigation. And so we know that there's a problem. We know that our content is being used by these tech platforms. 70% of our referral traffic comes from these two platforms, but only 65. So the inverse of that is that most of the people stay inside the walled gardens, because when you go to Google and Facebook, you're getting everything you need. It's not what it used to be, where Larry Page in 2009 said he wants to get the user to where he wants to be. No, now they want them to stay, because the longer people stay, the more that they can get data off that user, feed it into their advertising ecosystem that you were just talking about, and target them with ads. That's how they make money.
And as a news publisher myself, I know quite well that a good deal of my audience just reads the headline and lead and moves on. They don't go beyond that.
In Google or in
Right.
search, because they also then get a rich text. They get a what would you ask? They get said,
Exactly.
what do you want to know? They said, so they stay within the wall. They don't click through.
Exactly. We're going to talk about this compensation issue, its history, where we are today, and where the heck we're going to go tomorrow. We'll do that on the backside of this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus by Town News.
All right, Danielle. So we've established the lay of the land. There are, correct me if I'm wrong again, treat me like I'm a 6-year-old. There are 3 separate ways over the past few years that publishers have tried to be compensated. The first one is something called, correct me if I'm wrong, the LGSA, the Local Journalism Sustainability Act. This was grassroots from a couple publishers in our industry that were trying desperately to get tax credits, correct, for possibly the advertisers who support journalism, the people who subscribe to some form of journalistic entity, and more importantly, to the money that the publisher pays to hire local journalists. It wasn't perfect, but it had bipartisan support. Is the LGSA still a possibility, or is that gone? Where are we now with the new Congress and how things are moving on? That's my first question.
So, I mean, the first thing that I'll say that's really good is that with any of these bills, I mean, we just talked about Google and Facebook, and now we're going to another problem, but the solution is the same and addresses the same problem, which is that news outlets need to be able to sustain quality journalism. They need to survive.
Right.
As far as the recognition, the lawmakers' recognition of their need for a solution, regardless of setting aside the problem that's causing the need for a solution. Now just, should we give payroll tax credits? And that's the first, and I think that it has gotten the most momentum out of the LJSA, which was later attempted to be included in the BBB, and then and the reason why it had momentum is because there was spending measures being undertaken, not just because of COVID, because of the CARES Act, but then because during a Democratic Congress, they had a lot of measures that they wanted to fund through the government. And that's why there was Build Back Better and then the Inflation Reduction Act. Do I see the potential for those types of spending measures in this new Congress?
Yes.
With a House Republican leadership, although who knows right now? I mean, we see what's it's going to be tough, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a spending measure. You can find alternative ways of, if let's say there's tax reform, or there's other vehicles to attach something to. I think that the more important thing is that it get by anything that's going to pass in this Congress, the 118th, needs bipartisan support. full stop. Needs bipartisan support. And so what that bill, if I remember correctly, it has stayed in the same shape as it came out of the last attempt was the Inflation Reduction Act, and then again in the omnibus they tried everybody tried everything in the omnibus, but they tried. Yeah. And then although it was actually pretty slimmed down at the end of the day, but the last version that they were working on of the payroll tax credit, I wouldn't say LJSA, the payroll tax credit, needs bipartisan support. And right now it only has Democrat support in the Senate. So that's the challenge to overcome there.
So it's a battle if and when we'll ever get some form of payroll compensation to support journalism. So we're going to get into the JCPA in a moment. That's where I want to spend most of our time. The other issue, or the other legislation that's trickling up locally, are antitrust suits, correct? I mean, you came to a conference we were hosting in Pennsylvania, and we sat up there with the people from West Virginia who kind of incubated this 2 years ago, where there's various media companies now trying to claim that this is like back to the days of Teddy Roosevelt, right? This is huge. Like, Teddy Roosevelt, believe it or not, a Republican, broke up the railroads, if you look back in that era, that was one of the most democratic things a Republican has ever done. This, treating these guys like a trust, right? And trying to break them up. Where are we at on that? I mean, I know that's not really where you guys are putting a lot of your energy, but do you think there's any hope of those legislative issues, those cases, whatever, having any air this year?
So just to clarify, as a trade association, we're not going to be a party to a suit just because we have no damages. We have no, we just don't even have standing. I think that
right, but I want your lay of the land on that. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, absolutely. But my point in saying that is that doesn't mean that we're not invested in it, because I mean, if you'll remember, originally, before the DOJ even filed suit, which has been as a part of a landscape of litigation, not the publisher's suit that you're talking about that resides in SDNY because it was consolidated there, but they had their pending case with Colorado and such that was initiated by the Colorado State AG. Initially, before all of the cases were filed, we did a 2-year study analysis of our industry, and we did interviews. And if you'll remember, we did a ton of interviews where we asked what was happening in our industry and the practices to tie the nexus between the anti-competitive behavior of the platforms and what they do on a regular basis within the platforms with our content and the harm. So because people say we're just harmed, or we're just dying because we've done it to ourselves, we're not innovative, so on and so forth. But what we did is we provided the evidence of the direct nexus between the behavior and the harm, the behavior of the platforms. And we did countless interviews with our members so that it was anonymous, so that we could put it forward about what it is, their practices that they do to hurt our revenue, to hurt our data, to hurt our relationship with our readers, so on and so forth. And that proves that there's a harm. And that was used in the DOJ's case, which is now a piece of that is consolidated with New York, where the publishers, to your question, are fighting for damages, treble damages, and what you would fight for in an antitrust suit, so that you can, I don't want to say be made whole, but so that you can be compensated for the harm that's been done to you. And we totally support that litigation.
Now we get into the JCPA, which for those that don't understand it, the Journalism Compensation and Preservation Act, HR 1735, S673, basically would allow news publishers to collectively negotiate with these big tech companies for fair compensation. The reason it's called the Safe Harbor Bill, that's an expression you guys use, right? Where you collectively can come together in a safe harbor. This is what is going on in Australia, correct? And come together, work together to negotiate like a baseball team would with an owner, correct? I mean, do I have, just so we can get the lay of the land, where we could say, look, we're losing money, you're making money with our stuff, we deserve compensation, and we have the right to negotiate that with you. So that's what the JCPA was all about, had a lot of bipartisan support. Correct me if I'm wrong, it had a pretty good shot at the end of 2022, but then a whole mess of money was spent by big tech. That's the first thing that happened quickly, and just started, nailing a message out there, which you believe was false, right? I've gone to your, I mean, a lot of the things that were said on why this bill shouldn't go forward wasn't true. For example, it excluded nonprofits across the board. That was one of the things they were saying, and it excluded digital only. And it was only going to make the big fat cats like Rupert Murdoch money, because and they kept pointing to Australia, saying, look what happened to Murdoch on Australia. He made a windfall from big tech. This isn't going to help the small guys. Address that. Would you give us that story as it really was? And what was the final version looking like? And how did it get so quickly? How did it lose so much air so quickly in December of 2022?
I'll answer that last question first. The Congress ended.
Okay.
So
we didn't lose. We ran out of time.
That's an easy one. I'll take the easy one first. Congress ended. So during the lame duck, it's such a short session where you have to do things real quick. I mean, we're talking like days, like not even weeks, like it was weeks, but it's like they're shortened. When they come in, it's to do a bunch of votes because they got to get everything done at the end of the year. Nothing usually actually happens in the lame duck. It's why they call it lame duck. And it was actually a pretty active lame duck. They had the NDAA, they had the gay rights vote, or the gay marriage vote. They had omnibus. They had a lot actually that happened in this lame duck, to be honest. But then it goes away. It's like pumpkin. So why did it end so fast? It's because Congress adjourns and they go away for the holidays, and then they reconvene on January 3rd. So that's the quickness of it. So that's why it ended so quickly. But what happens during such a condensed period of time is based on years of work. So before the lame duck, we had years of drafting, redrafting, partnering with the broadcasters to be able to adjust the legislation to look more like Australia so that it's effective. One of the biggest complaints from both Democrats and Republicans that we received was, is this going to work? Is this bill actually going to accomplish its goal and pay news publishers? Because before it was just what you called the safe harbor. And we were going to get together and we thought we were going to have so much leverage that we were going to win any negotiation. And that was a bit naive, I think, in retrospect, because what we saw was the platforms in Australia and Europe and other places just have no intention of coming to the table. So we saw that we had to have some sort of a backstop, a dispute resolution mechanism. And following the lead of Australia, because it was genius, the baseball style arbitration was something that we amended the bill with, reintroduced it, and then did a substitute amendment. Took a while because we also had to negotiate with a lot of parties. Some may argue that we spent too much time negotiating with parties who still even, unfortunately publicly complain, but, are as happy as they'll ever be. Because don't forget, this is, again, just like I said with LJSA, in a Congress where there are such razor thin margins, whatever it is that you're going to do, you have to negotiate and compromise. That's just the way it is in any legislation. And so if you have a party who's a part of a negotiation about a piece of legislation, and you see it right now, you actually see it right now with the McCarthy speakership. If you see a party who's participating in negotiations, who's so dug in on what it is they're looking for, that they won't compromise, well, it's tough including the people, organizations like that, because everybody at the table has to compromise, and that's just the way it is. And at the end of the day, we got a very balanced measure that accomplishes its goal. And then, went through a markup in the Senate. And again, there was a compromise there because Senator Ted Cruz didn't want, the platforms to censor, I don't think. And then everybody agreed. They don't want any of this bill to have anything to do with display of content. You want to say what Google can and can't put up on the internet. I mean, that's not something this is about. This is only about compensation. That was made clear, ironically, through Ted Cruz. And then it went forward in September. And what you're asking about was, after all of this had been done,
all of this went down.
All of this had been done.
Was finally ground and made. And no bill goes down perfectly, right? You don't want to watch how they make the sausage. Nothing's perfect, but in it was all done. And then go ahead. I'm setting this up right now. At the last minute, correct me if I'm wrong, a bunch of information was just thrown out into the ecosystem, and it was just thrown out electronically. It was almost like, I don't know, what do you call it? Like just soundbite after soundbite after soundbite after soundbite that basically convinced some senators, correct me if I'm wrong, to say this just ain't worth it right now and just table it. Do I have that correct?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if anyone will ever know absolutely what it was that made the Senate Republican decide.
McConnell, yeah.
McConnell not to include it at the end of the day. So what happened was, in the defense authorization bill, because it's a clean measure, or I'm sorry, it requires a conference report, which makes it, we'll just say it makes it easier to get it done. And there's, it goes through Congress pretty quickly. And the reason why is because it funds the military, but he wants soldiers to have paychecks. So there's a significant investment in getting this done from both the Senate's, both the Democrats and the Republicans. And so having something ride on this is, I mean, that's kind of unusual to begin with. And the fact that they put us on this with a few other things was, it means what that says to me, honestly, is it says that Schumer takes this really seriously and he really wanted to get this done. I give him so much credit for his leadership here and for standing behind our industry and really championing this, because to put it in the NDA in the first place, because of what I just mentioned, means a lot. And
Right.
At the end of the day, to jump to the why it didn't work, because we had 4-corner sign off and it was ready to go. It was going to rules 10 a.m. on that Monday morning. It got delayed because they asked for permitting and safe banking, the Manchin ask and the marijuana. And then the Republicans, we have a saying in on the Hill, something can't get too much sunshine. If you give something too much sunshine, you're attracting trouble. You're attracting controversy and challenges. And so what happened was this got too much sunshine. By
a bunch of big tech digital advertising, hundreds of thousands of dollars that went down in a period of 1 week. I mean, it was loud. And then a bunch of talking heads, if I may use that term, good or bad, right or wrong, who are representing different factions of the media industry. And also, I can't believe this, but the ACLU.
The last part is arguable.
Okay.
Representing media.
Okay, but they started screaming, and correct me if I'm wrong, the one who screams the loudest was the sunshine. And this is what bothered me the most. I'm not saying that these talking points can't be debated. Like, if you look at Australia, it only benefited the fat cats. This is going to be the Mike Reed windfall. I'm looking at actual quotes that we had in E&P from other people during this time. The final version excluded all nonprofits across the board. The News Media Alliance does represent all journalism, and the Online News Associate, the Lion, was vehemently against this. I think personally, what? Excuse me?
That's not surprising.
Well, the reason being, correct me if I'm wrong, that they would rather see legacy media go away.
Oh, that's interesting, because I have heard that and seen that in some of their work. But no, that they get funded by Google. So that's not the reason why I say that's not surprising, is because a lot of the AstroTurf organizations that are funded by Google are the ones who are most vocal. And it's not actually surprising, not just because of that and because of how much funding there is. We have unbelievably well-resourced adversaries, but we've also seen around the world, this is not new, in
so this is what bothers me. When G and I started, we were the first to report it. They actually came on this program, and this all started in Germany with and Google we're going to support the. I asked the question, are you not throwing this money at our industry so someday when specific lobbying goes down or specific legislation goes down, you will have more levers to pull? And the response was, we're a separate department. We're not worried about that. We're going to support you. Did this not pay off? did Google's funding of certain organizations, and they're throwing a lot, we're talking a couple $100 million, which is nothing more than a rounding error. Did that not finally pay off where they outgunned us? That is my question. And I hope you don't mind the question. Did we get outgunned?
No, not at all. Oh, absolutely. We always knew this was David and Goliath. What the type of funding you're talking about, though, is very different from the type of funding I was talking about. The type of funding you're talking about is what they would hope would be called philanthropic spending to be able to support journalism through their GNI and their grant funding. And I think that, maybe there is good intention there, good, bad organizations have good people,
Okay, go ahead.
And good intentions, and corporate responsibility. But the spending that I was talking about, and whether that's a payoff or not, I mean, there's a spectrum of to what degree it is. As far as to get out, actually in Australia, it was very much admittedly to get out of legislation, because you're not designated if you do enough in the industry to compensate publishers. So that's actually a very clear way of saying, I am compensating. I don't need to be designated under the code to be then have to go to arbitration. So to answer your question, yeah, I mean, I guess it serves that purpose for sure. But the spending I'm talking about is completely different, because in DC, and also what we saw in Europe, what we saw in Australia, what we're now seeing in Canada, what we'll see in India, New Zealand, everywhere where this legislation is being tried, there's massive spending on advocacy, front groups, advertising, just like you said, so on and so forth. So the reason why we weren't surprised, and that's why when we were talking about Lion, I'm not surprised, because we've already seen that in the EU, when the publishers write the first of a few steps that they needed to get to the same place kind of that Australia is. But the first step was this publishers right back in 2019, and it passed the parliament. And if you saw the picketers outside of the parliament when they were voting on it at the end and it passed, it was like ants. There were so many people, and the masses came out. And you remember Sopa Pippa that preceded that, and how they get the people in general, and how many people that they can touch with their networks mobilized to be against something. And that something will always be a rule that holds them responsible. So we've seen that. We heard the internet's going to break. We heard this, we heard that. And we saw the exact same thing happen in Australia, a little bit less effective, because people have caught on. You say the internet's going to break so many times, and it hasn't broken. When the thing happened, what you said that would break it, you kind of start to lose credibility.
It's depressing, because when I go to the NMA website, you actually have this lengthy list. It takes forever to scroll, of how many newspapers published editorials in favor of this legislation, logically played out. I mean, some of these were brilliantly well versed. And if that same had happened 20 years ago in any legislative issue, it would have been like the days of Edward R. Murrow taking on McCarthy. I mean, but we don't have the same juice anymore. This is what's depressing to me. We can have 100, 200, 300 titles out there publishing away an op-ed, but if Google and Facebook just want to throw some information out into the ecosphere, it's going to be hard to battle, correct? What can we do different? Maybe you're sensing my anger.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that we can mobilize our supporters more. So I was very disappointed, for example, the ACLU supported Google. That was very disappointing. And the reasons for doing so was that the bill would force extreme content onto the internet. And I actually asked them, I just held a call with them right before the holidays. And I said, tell me why you believe this, because I saw this letter, really need to understand this. We're, very surprising. We're usually supportive of each other. And they couldn't explain how the text would result, and how the text would being played out would result in forcing content to be displayed, because I took issue with it, because nothing in the text actually forces content to be displayed. And their argument, and I'm being completely candid, their argument was that it would scare Google into thinking that they had to display content, because they would be fearful of repercussions under the law. And I said, but there's nothing in the law that would actually have those repercussions. And they said they would be careful. And it's conjecture.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Speculation.
Yeah.
It's not, if I was,
yeah. And then if that's the best argument that they've got, I would hope that they would reconsider, which we can always work on this year. And we can work with other partners to be able to see where we can go to, or other constituents to see where we can go to maybe educate a little bit more. I don't know if we'll ever get the unions to be able to get to a good place. I think that they have a lot of frustration and anger over layoffs and other things that, being supportive, although it would benefit them, I don't know that we'll ever get them there, but there are different constituencies. So you said, how can we get who would be powerful and with us, usually with us, to be more vocal? And those are a couple of challenges, the ones that I just identified. But the ones that are opportunities are academics who support, other countries that are supportive to show that it's been successful. What we have in our favor is that there's an actual test case. It's not a test case, it's an actual case of it working.
You didn't get all the academics, and I'll give you some examples. I mean, Ken Doctor, Neiman Lab, Harvard, whatever, now doing his own digital startup. That program is back to back with this one. When I asked him about his lack of support for the JCPA, he honed in on this, and this is what I found, and I argued with him on this. He said, "There's nowhere in that legislation that says this money will go directly to that journalist. It could be gobbled up by the Mike Reeds of the world, because And then my response was, correct me if I'm wrong, I wish you were on the show with me, but that wasn't the number one topic, was no legislation is perfect. But how, what do you want to delay this forever until you get the perfect bill? We could be out of business by then. So am I saying that correct? I mean, nothing's going to go down that's perfect, but there was no legislation.
I'll go one step further, Mike. There's no legislation, there's no compensation mechanism that has ever ensured an investment of how you spend the money you receive from an exchange of payment.
Right. I mean,
you don't make Beyonce get paid and spend it on her sound editors. You don't let broadcasters get paid and make them spend it on their executive producers or whoever. So there's no payment, there's no investment requirements on any payment mechanism that ever has existed in history. The same thing that happened in Australia, there's no investment requirements that you use the money in a specific way. And of course it ended up being paid on journalists, not just because it's what we do, it's like investing in paper if you're a paper factory, but also it's because it gets them more money. It's also financially motivated. So because the more you produce, the more content, the more people you hire, the more you can produce, the more content you have. So it's also intuitive. So of course the Australians spent the money on journalists, but that's where I was talking about before, where you need to compromise. Not only does the bill already have more than probably any other bill that ensures, even including the payroll tax credit that actually has to do with journalists, it doesn't have any spending requirements. That's one irony that I'll set aside. But in the JCPA, it does more than any other bill because it ensures that whatever you get paid by the platforms, which is highly unusual, that be dependent on how many journalists you employ, dollar for dollar. It already has something, and they want more. And this goes to what I was saying before about compromise. If you want something so extreme that you're never going to get because Republicans are never going to support it, you're not going to have a bill. And then you're going to be hurt at the end of the day. So it's a little bit of cut your nose to spite your face.
Nothing's going to be perfect here. I mean, and again, I kind of try to reinforce this at E&P because whenever how many times have you gone to a cocktail reception or met someone new and you mention that you are supporting the newspaper industry and suddenly you get into a dialogue, either if they're far right, then maybe it should just go away. And you try to explain the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal is not the industry we're trying to support here. I mean, yes, they're part of our industry and there's some amazing journalists there. I'm not being negative for USA Today. It's the small town newspaper trying to keep that local school board under some form of check and balance. It's that church supper reporter in that small town. That is the America we're trying to keep going here.
That's right.
So there is no perfect legislation. And I know that some of this may be skimmed off to the big groups. We saw what happened with the COVID payments, right? How many millions of dollars got paid into some of the big pockets, but the little guys survived as well. And that's really what this is. See, I could go, I'm now taking your, yes, E&P is in favor of some legislation as quick as possible. So let me ask you the final question here. What's next? I mean,
yeah.
What's going to happen now? I mean, I know where you got this dysfunctional House of Representatives with such a razor thin margin that maybe nothing will get accomplished. But what can happen in the near term, or are we just going to wait it out 2 years? Where's the position right now of the NMA?
So, well, first of all, it's important to remember that like if we're going to talk about payment compensation mechanisms, like I was just referring to, these things take years. I mean, the retransmission consent in 1992, that was after a lawsuit and many years of legislating. And then also another 5 to 10 or however long the Turner cases followed after. They didn't actually get paid until, so these things take a while. It would have been an anomaly, and someone could say a miracle if it passed this quickly in this Congress. We had so much momentum. I think the reason why it got so far so quick, and people were surprised it got as far as it did in the defense bill, and that it got attached to the defense bill.
But just to interrupt you, because I was part of that. If you might remember, I was president of the Maine Association of Broadcasters. Bill Cohen, and it was our senator at the time, and McCarthy. I mean, at that time, when we were arguing for retransmission consent for cable companies to compensate the broadcasters, we hadn't lost 40% of the television stations around the country.
Right. That's a really good point. So that's why
we were doing fine. We were making money.
You were making money. I know.
Right.
I think that's why it moved so quick. Because and then if you were part of that, you'll recall how slow that was to actually get the retransmission consent through. But I think that's why it happened so quick here, and why Schumer wanted to put it in the defense bill, because he because of what you just said about our industry is in crisis right now to a certain extent. And so that's why it was pushed so aggressively at the end there. But what I've now realized coming back into this Congress, and really it's only been a couple days, is that despite the chaos in the House, the Senate is actually very revved up to go. So there was a lot of momentum created at the end there. And because Congress has to end, what do you do with all of that fuel that was, burned up or fueled up energy that was going into the end of the Congress last year? And then coming into this new Congress, it didn't go away. And what do you do with that? And in the Senate, we have a Democratic Senate with now one more Democratic senator, and an interest in reintroducing right away, and then a markup, because you have to mark up a bill. Unfortunately, you have to do that again, and then move forward as, with the other antitrust measures, because there was so much momentum going into last year and because it didn't get done at the end of the day. So in the Senate, it's very promising, which is not surprising. We've always had support in the Senate, and we continue to a very strong bipartisan support in the Senate. And then in the House, like I said, I keep joking about what's going on with the speaker, but I'm serious. We really don't know what's going to happen. They're reconvening again today at noon, so in about an hour they'll reconvene. And McCarthy, it's not clear whether or not he has the votes. He just gave a lot to Chip Roy last night. He took his super PAC, had made concessions. And so we'll see if he gets the votes, but he was already 20 down. So if he can get to 5, he can, and then they were also talking about doing plurality. So McCarthy's speakership is uncertain. And so if he doesn't ascend, then who is the speaker? Do we have a path in the House? We continue to have bipartisan support in the House, but that is the unknown. And that is our challenge. And we still have Jim Jordan, who is very reluctant to support the bill. That's an understatement of the year, but he's very, unsupportive of any antitrust measure, frankly. But and I do think he does actually have a sympathy for broadcasters and journalists. So at least his staff do, and his And he does like some of his papers in his district. So we'll work with his office. We'll see what we get, probably not much, but then we also need to see what leadership looks like at the higher level in the House. And that's a big a question mark right now. So that's the next step. But, actually, let me say more generally. All of the things that we talked about prove that there's a problem. There's an undeniable problem that exists that most sane people would admit exists, and that is the anti-competitive and abusive dominance of the tech platforms to extract value from local journalism. That problem has not gone away. We have a broken business landscape. That problem still exists. Lawmakers know it exists, and they're invested in fixing it. And I think that that's a great place to start.
There you go. So the fight goes on, correct? I mean, that's you will be busy for this year and the next two, and then we'll see how the landscape changes again. Danielle Coffey, Executive VP, General Counsel for News Media Alliance. We are very, very happy that you invested some time. We know how busy you are for this platform and our magazine. If people want more information about, you keep a very updated page at the NMA site, right? I mean, you're constantly updating the latest talking points, copies of letters you can send to congressmen, just the editorials are listed there. The News Media Alliance website is where?
Well, I think we did what's it called? A bit.ly or a hyphenated link. Anyways, it's newsmediaalliance.org, but you can go to the safeharborbill.com page. And then Lindsay Loving is our comms director, and Megan Shea is our legislative, and can answer any questions and get you anything you need.
Their contact information's on the website, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much, Danielle. You guys keep up the fight. We'll be staying in touch with you.
Thank you, Mike, very much for having me. Happy New Year.